everybody. Good evening, Luqman Nation. This is Jackie Luqman.
And I'm Abdul Shahid Luqman, and welcome to Coffee, Current Events, and Politics at Luqman Nation, the most dangerous show on the internet. And the reason why we call it the most dangerous show on the internet, first of all, we'd like to welcome all of you out there and Luqman Nation. But the reason why it's the most dangerous show on the internet, because we give you we give you politics through a Pan-African black perspective, and we have the honest conversations here. We don't deal too much of conspiracy theories. We don't deal in too much of the fluffy, puffy stuff. We don't deal into a whole lot of stuff that you could get anywhere when you just start searching around. But if you really want that honest conversation about what's going on today in our world and what's going on inside of progressive circles from an unorthodox perspective, then you landed at the right place.
Yeah, so just going to give you guys a few minutes to grab some stuff and invite some friends to share this video. We're going to check in with our friends over on YouTube in a minute, but absolutely share this video, invite some people, because we are going to continue the conversation we started last week about the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission Report. I hope y'all did y'all homework from last week and read the links that we provided in last week's video, read the Kerner Commission Report, or at least read some of it, because I was actually incorrect. It was it wasn't 200 pages, it was like 500 pages.
Oh, wow.
Pages. You have to understand the significance of the Kerner Commission Report, because this was a bunch of congressmen, most of them white. I think there was one black member of the commission. They were given their marching orders by President Lyndon Johnson. Right, because Johnson, there were lots of uprisings around the country during that summer, and Johnson wanted to find definitive proof that it was the black radicals and the black Muslims and the black separatists and who were causing these uprisings. And these mostly white congressmen had no reason.
Right, we're not talking about 2018 white congressmen. We're talking about 1960s white.
We talk about 1960s white, and I don't even know that they were even radical or revolutionary or even necessarily concerned about the issues that they uncovered. But the important thing about this commission is that it was made up of a bunch of old white men, mostly, who had every reason to just go ahead and say, yeah, black folks are just losing their minds and going crazy and burning stuff up. But when they do the investigation into some of these incidences, what they found was, no, this is white racism that created these situations, these environments that led to these uprisings. These people are responding to something, and what they're responding to was institutional racism that was systemic. So we're not talking about because that's why I'm glad you clarified that, because we don't want to talk about white racism like the white guy across the street don't like me. We're talking about the type of racism that can prevent black Americans from enjoying the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that we're supposed to be guaranteed to have in this country. Exactly, and just so that you don't think this is like something that we've solved, because that's kind of the attitude people have about racism in America since the Civil Rights Act, right? A lot of people believe that racism was solved since the Civil Rights Act, and
we had Obama. After we had a black president, it's over. That's the past now.
Right. Well, let me tell you why. We're still having this problem of institutional racism in this country, and especially this is especially important for progressives, because isn't Bernie Sanders speaking in Arizona?
He spoke in Arizona today.
Okay, he did speak in Arizona today.
He did speak in Arizona today.
And y'all know that we have had some difficulties with our progressive brothers and sisters the past couple of years in regard to focusing on black issues. because we understand that there is no blanket policy that can be applied to all people that are going to address the specific issues that Black people face. And that's been a really difficult argument to have with people. It's like people don't believe that. Right. They think that we're just being divisive, and we've been told that all this summer. Well, let me show you why it's important for progressives to understand that racial issues have to be addressed, even with inside in the context of progressive policies. Let me make sure I got this. There we go. Now again, our favorite Senator Sanders spoke in Arizona. I am hoping that Senator Sanders addressed this. African Americans in Arizona face more hunger than the rest of the state. This was published in Arizona News by the KTAR news affiliate, and it was published on March 1st, 2018. Now, I got to tell you, I just have to say this. Any political candidate who is not doing the research to uncover the issues that people in an area that this candidate is speaking in are facing, they need to be fired.
Right.
Because I'm serious, if we can sit here on a lazy Sunday afternoon where we're recovering from losing an hour and we can find this.
Well, actually, and that's something that, and this is why you guys are so important to us too. I actually was turned on to this story by one of our Luqman Nation friends, Cheryl Howard.
Oh, shit, see?
Cheryl Howard sent me this story, and I was just appalled because, I mean, here we are in 2018, and here we have Black people. This is more proof, and we're going to go to another story to back this up. But this is the proof that we talked about. Black people, in particularly, living in third world conditions in a so-called first world country.
Absolutely. So thank you. This is also why it is important to not just focus on unity for the sake of unity. You've got to have people in this coalition who are not afraid to point out, okay, this is where we need to focus.
Right.
Because some of us in this coalition are hurting more than others. So thank you, Cheryl. We appreciate that. All right, so this story from Phoenix. African Americans in Arizona have a harder time putting food on the table than most other African Americans in the United States. They're worse off than most other Black people in the country.
Wow. And this is not a southern state. You know, we always associate this type of poverty with the South, but this is not a southern state.
Right. So according to a recent report, where of course we're going to give you a link to this story and this report, but you can also find this article on our page, on our Coffee Current Events and Politics page. According to a report from the nonprofit Bread for the World, Arizona is the 14th hungriest state in the nation for African Americans. While hunger declined for the rest of the population in the last year, 153,000 more African American households in the U.S. experienced hunger during that same time period. All this talk about the economy being so great, it's not true for Black people. It is clearly not true for Black people. If 153,000 more Black people had a harder time eating than anybody else in the country, and let's see, in addition, 1 in 4 African American households in Arizona, or 22% of African American households in the state, are living at risk of hunger, compared to 1 in 7 households in the rest of Arizona. So listen, y'all, we're definitely going to give you a link to this article. Let me see. Eric Mitchell, a spokesperson for Bread for the World, told KTAR News that some of the factors that contribute to hunger in African American households include, and it is not a coincidence that he brought this up, and I actually didn't even read this whole article before right now, but one of the factors that contribute to households in hunger in African American households include high incarceration and unemployment rates, poor education, and higher amounts of low-wage jobs. We're talking about incarceration tonight specifically. So listen, you all, I really want you to understand that, I'm trying to find the right button. I really want you to understand how important it is that we pay attention. We, meaning we progressives, we on the left, pay attention to issues that disproportionately affect specific groups of people. You can call that identity politics if you want to. You can call it divisive if you want to. I don't care. Because when 22% of black people in Arizona are hungry, and 153,000 more black people in the country had a harder time eating than anybody else, even in an economy that's supposed to be so much better, I cannot be concerned with how you feel about me talking about black people and these issues we face.
And I can rest assured, without even being in the room when they took these numbers down, I can rest assured that with the reasons that they gave, mass incarceration, poor education, high low wage jobs, I could guarantee you that the reason why black people are going hungry like they are in Arizona is because most of their money is going towards housing.
Exactly.
I can guarantee that is probably a major factor in all of this.
And let's just make the connection. We're talking about high incarceration rates. Who was the sheriff? Who was the sheriff in what was the largest county in Arpaio or whatever that racist so-and-so's name. So I mean,
yeah, but see, he's only the sheriff of one county.
Exactly. He's
not the state. This is the whole state.
That's true. Isn't he running for some state? But we're talking about, this is where it becomes systemic. We're talking about an attitude that people in power and authority have toward black people. And they implement policies that disproportionately affect black people. And honestly, my fellow progressive brothers and sisters, if Bernie Sanders didn't talk about this during his speech in Arizona, I still got problems with Bernie Sanders.
And I really need for us as progressives, and those of us who call themselves progressives, I need us to really think. We can't think like the Trumpsters think. It's like we run into these issues and we run into these complicated issues, and we think that we can address these issues with these bumper sticker type of explanations. The fact remains is that what we're doing is we're tying this in to what the Kerner Commission found out 50 years ago. 50 years ago, the Kerner Commission talked about scarcity in housing. They talked about lack of access to employment, and not just employment, meaningful employment.
Right.
They talked about the difficulties in policing in the neighborhoods. Everything that still exists today in the black community. And we tying this in because stories like this is telling us that that the same systemic problems that they found, that the government acknowledged, because see, when they did the Kerner report and they got their findings together, this was the government acknowledging that yes, this is a problem. These are the systemic problems that black people in this country face, which is the reason why that Lyndon Johnson, which was part of his motivation for his war on poverty, because he wanted to be the president to have solved all of this.
Right.
And I'm gonna tell you what's even more shameful. What's even more shameful is the fact that, say what you want, Trump been in office for about a year now, right? A little over a year. But let's say that this is happening after we just had 8 years of Obama.
Right.
You know what I mean? So let's not, don't gloss over that. Let's not gloss over that. This is after 8 years of Obama that black people are not only starving, going hungry in Arizona, but that black people are still remain stagnant in home ownership. The incarceration rate amongst black people had fallen a little bit. But what I'm saying is that you had 8 years of the first black president. And this shows that there was no emphasis made on the part of his administration to address a lot of these systemic problems.
Exactly. And why was that? Because what was repeatedly told to people when we wanted to bring up these issues that affect black people that Obama wasn't addressing? Well, he's not the president of just black America. Well, you looking at our economic and social and educational and every other standing at the bottom of every measure that exists in this country, I mean, you would think that black people aren't even a part of this society.
Right.
So, I mean, how is it that you have a government that can, or not a government, so to speak, but how is it that you can have people who run the government who can address specific issues that face every other group of people disproportionately, but when it comes to black people, oh, he's not the president of black people.
And that was black people saying that.
Thank you.
That's the thing. It wasn't white people saying it.
Right?
You guys are innocent on this one. It was black people saying it. And the most ridiculous things that I've heard black people say, especially was one woman called up a talk show and she said, well, he can't do anything for black people because they'll kill him.
Oh yeah, remember we talked about that.
So this was black people not understanding politics. Mm-hmm. We could laugh about it all we want, but it's sad. This is black people who don't understand how the political game is played. You don't give someone, I don't care who they are, 98, 99% of your vote and you walk away with nothing. Mm-hmm. You don't do that. You don't go into politics appealing to people's morality. You don't go into politics hitching your wagon to somebody else's cause and you don't get nothing out of it. We have to change the way that and when I say we, black people in this country have to understand how politics in this country is played. Another thing is the fact that again, we have not had any politician. When Bernie was in Arizona today, and I went on a live stream, and I didn't expect it to get to Bernie, but a lot of his supporters, and I put the story on there. I said, okay, Bernie's in Arizona. Let's talk about this. Right. Let's talk now. I didn't expect Bernie Sanders to actually talk about it.
Of course, right.
But not once did anybody, and see, this is the reason why we have a problem in this so-called progressive movement. Not once did anybody, and they had about hundreds of people on this live stream, and no one acknowledged that. Not one person acknowledged that when I was on that live stream. I said, he's in a state where black people are starving.
Yeah.
This is more about income inequality. This is more where he's in a state where black people are starving, and none of you so-called good people on this stream, run Bernie run, and none of you good people on this stream even want to acknowledge that.
But again, these are some of the same people who will tell us, not unlike the Democrats, well, who are you going to vote for? You going to vote for Trump again? Because every time we criticize Bernie Sanders with some people, that's what we get back. Oh, well, then what did you do? Did you vote for Trump?
Pardon me.
We're literally, when we have said in the past, and we keep saying that we're fighting for our lives, we ain't joking, y'all. We are not joking. We are dying in this country because of bad, racist politics and policies, but also because of political neglect. And it's not even benign neglect. It is like aggressive, intentional, I'm just not going to pay any attention to you because you aren't supporting my needs. And you can't tell me that I'm supposed to unify with you, but that's how you're going to treat me when it comes to me fighting for my people. Oh no, that's not working. So is this the other story you were talking about?
All right, this ties in. This other story that we're about to put up ties into this whole thing of what we mentioned. Now let's go back a bit before we share this, okay, and how this relates to black people. Mm-hmm. All right, two stories. If some of you remember before, there's two stories which come to mind when they talk about the third world conditions of African Americans in this country. Third world conditions, black people who are living in third world conditions in this country. I have to constantly emphasize that. The first one was the hookworms in Alabama. Right. The fact of hookworms in Alabama because black people who were living in this certain district did not have adequate sewer or systems to dispose of waste. The waste was being disposed on their lawns. The lawns were attracting hookworms, and the people were walking outside, especially children, being affected by hookworms.
Right.
Now, mind you, now hookworms was something that was supposed to have been eradicated in this country, at least in the last maybe, I say 50 years.
Yeah.
So so there hasn't been a it was like something that was part of the past due to unsanitary conditions and all that stuff. Well, we found out last year that in Alabama, because of neglect, political neglect, that black people in this certain section of Alabama, county of Alabama, were suffering from hookworm infection. Right. Now, the person who, the congressperson of this district had to be shamed, publicly shamed, in order for them to do anything about it. Now, we take this story, and I'm sure there's plenty more, but I want to highlight the two. Take that story that happened last year. Now, we just shared with you about black people, citizens. Now, these aren't people that's coming on a boatload. And, I mean, we're talking about people who are supposed to be American citizens, not born and raised here. These are not people who are coming from Syria. These are not people coming from Haiti. These are not people coming from outside another nation. These are supposed to be homegrown American citizens who can't even put food on their table. No one said that the Haitians in Arizona is starving. No one said that the Hispanics in Arizona are starving. Nobody said that no other group in Arizona has had a hard time putting food on the table except who? African American. So if that is not a systemic, organized, or if this is not a planned action of disenfranchisement, what more can it be? So what I'm saying is that this ties in to the next story that you're going to show, where MIT economists have talked about America's regression back to a third world nation for most of its citizens.
Yep, this is it. And this is posted on from the Intellectualist. And it says, study by MIT economists, U.S. has regressed to a third world nation for most of its citizens. But it's interesting, they say for most of its citizens, right? But it talks specifically about prejudice and power, and how America is divided. Pitting the left against right, conservatives against the liberal agenda. But really, what's been going on behind the scenes is that there is this enormous divide between the haves and the have-nots. Right? We all know that. This is what we all talk about. However, when you come down to the things that create this third world economy that a lot of people are this third world society that a lot of people are living in, in the Lewis model of a dual economy, and this is from the Institute for New Economic Thinking, much of the low-wage sector has little influence over public policy. That's true. And these are the markers of a third world country, right? So they're comparing they're telling us the reasons they say the United States has regressed to a third world country.
They have a measuring stick for this.
Right. So the measuring stick is that much of the low wage sector has little influence over public policy. That's true. We don't. The high income sector will keep wages down in the other sector to provide cheap labor for its businesses. Check. Social control is used to keep the low-wage sector from challenging the policies favored by the high-income sector. Mass incarceration. Check.
There we go again. Is this not the second story that we just presented to our audience, where mass incarceration is a contributing factor?
And what is the social control? People learned a lot of new phrases in the recent new progressive wave and the Bernie Sanders revolution, and they don't really understand what they mean. And one of those phrases is social control, because you hear a lot of people using that phrase, but they don't know what it means. Social control is nothing more than getting a whole group of people to believe a certain thing so that they can do the bidding of other people. for the benefit of other people. And when we're talking about something like this, like mass incarceration, what do you think the social control is? It's racism.
Yep.
So that poor white people keep voting for politicians who push policies that don't help the poor white people, but the politicians say, see, the problem really is that we need to control those criminal Negroes over there.
Right. Or MS-13.
Oh yeah, we need to lock up MS-13 and deport all the illegals and all the Mexicans because they're all MS-13. That's social control. White people are being socially controlled by white people with power.
Right, exactly.
That's what that is. So of course we're going to give you the link to this article too. This is some fascinating stuff. And I'm telling you, progressives, we are telling you, if we do not address these problems that are based in racial bias in this country, I don't know how many times we can't say this enough. Unless we address racism in this country, you all are not getting anything else. I'm serious. The revolution you want won't happen unless we address racism in this country, because the racism is the foundation. And people are always saying, well, it's not race, it's class. Classism wouldn't work. The class chasm wouldn't work in this country if race were not a part of the discussion.
Well, there's classism when the group is homogenous. So when you got when you got all white people in West Virginia and you remove black people, I think that the class argument would have been valid if blacks never came to this country.
Okay.
Now, and the reason why I say that is because there was the Irish. The Irish came here, and we know what European immigrant groups had suffered when they came here when blacks weren't around.
True.
Now, when it was just white folks dealing with white folks, then it was the haves and the have-nots,
right,
and it was all of the class thing. Black people black people changed the
dynamics.
The dynamics. Yeah. So now what happened was, we seen that during the draft riots of the late 1800s.
Right, that's a great point.
Right. So here you got white people getting newly arrived white people to fight in the Civil War, and basically just abusing them for their own political gains and stuff. But then, and that was white people abusing white people. Then as soon as blacks migrated into New York City and places like that, and then the politicians start saying, well, you're going to be fighting for them.
Right.
Then all of a sudden it was like, well, now it's like, it's no longer class, it's that it's race.
Right. I'm not fighting for those Negroes.
Right. So, the class argument can be used when the group is homogenous. You know what I mean? So when black people, it's not class. Black people is not class. Black people, when it's black and brown people together, or in a certain situation, and even if some places yellow people, wherever you find a different demographic outside of European descendants, then you will find that it's not class, it's race. Right. It's only class when it's all Europeans together.
Or and let's be honest, because we always say here, look, we, like you said at the beginning of the show, we have honest conversations here. We don't have any cut cards on this show because we literally don't have time. We don't have time to be coddling people's feelings and not saying certain things because we don't want to upset certain people. Class is used to pit black people against black people. That class is one of the oldest ways this society has used to socially control black people. It's pitting the black haves against the black have-nots.
But that's also due because we've been orientated in this culture.
You
see what I'm saying?
Right.
So when you're disconnected, and I know we're going off a bit, but when you're disconnected from what your culture was, which may not that and sorry pro-black folks, but there was no utopia in Africa either. They had their own hierarchies too.
You mean Wakanda isn't real?
No, but they had their own hierarchies too. But the type of class that we experience, even as oppressed people, is rooted in Europe, and I mean, Europe enslaved us. So our educational dynamics didn't come from Africa or from whatever tribe we were supposed to have came from. Our educational and social dynamics came from your enslavers, our enslavers,
Right.
our oppressors. So when you growing up in that land, you know, it reminds me of on Wounded Knee or Bended Knee, Wounded Knee. On HBO, and I can never get out of my mind the Indian guy who accepted Christianity, went to go back and get his son, who was still following the traditional ways of the tribe. And he drilled into this boy how the Indians' ways is wrong. And, you know, the white man's God is better, and the white man this is better, and blah, 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 blah. And he accepted that. I mean, I'm talking about the father accepted that, and he wanted that for his son because he looked around and like, well, white folks ain't going nowhere. So my son has to grow up in this world that they control. So he needs to learn how to get along in order to advance. It's the same way with every oppressed group that's being oppressed by a dominant group. They, in order to get what you can in that society, then the logical thing is, well, we have to adopt the ways of the dominant group. But the fact remains is, for African Americans, we've done that, and unlike other groups of people who adopted that way and were able to get further than us, you know, and they were able to adopt those ways and navigate this themselves through there.
Right.
They did not have the opposition. They had some opposition, but they did not have the amount of opposition that African Americans have had, even when we tried to adopt the ways of the dominant group.
Exactly. I mean, so it's interesting when you have these conversations, and you really flesh out, is it race or is it class? You really do begin to see that for African Americans, you can't have one without the other. Not when you're talking about oppression, the oppression of African Americans, and we would go even further to say that is true in regard to the oppression of Black people all around the world, because we share a common story. But that's a whole nother show. We really are getting off track. So, all right, incarceration. We started talking about the Kerner Report, the Kerner Commission Report last week.
Right.
We have talked about the Kerner Commission Report on this show several times before. I know at least one time last year we've posted stuff about it before. The Kerner Commission Report has always been this fascinating moment in political history for me, because it was the one moment in the post-civil rights era where the federal government admitted, we screwed this up.
And attempted to try to do something about it.
Attempted to do something about it. The government implemented programs. Lyndon Johnson's, like you said, Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty came from the Kerner Commission Report. This was Johnson who wanted to blame this on Black people and have a reason to not do nothing.
Right.
But his own congressman came back and said, Mr. President, this is on us. This is on American society. This is on the American government. We have to fix this. And Lyndon Johnson, for whatever else good or bad you say about him, he did implement policies to address some of these issues that were raised in the Kerner Commission Report. And like we said last week, what happened? Why are we still in the social and economic situation we're in? This is where the conservatives, like we said last week, this is where the conservatives start lying.
Right.
Because they will say that the war on poverty didn't work. What they won't tell you was that Richard Nixon cut all the programs that Lyndon Johnson implemented. And he began to defund them, and then every president after Nixon ran on a platform on the war on poverty isn't working, so we need to cut social programs. Republicans have done that, absolutely, but don't think Democrats haven't done it either, because our favorite Democratic neocon light was Bill Clinton.
Right, and the drug war started under Richard Nixon.
Exactly.
But I think that I would kind of disagree a little bit. Is I think that it's not that. You're right. They did say that the war on poverty didn't work. What they failed to mention is that the war on poverty didn't go far enough, and it was allowed to go far. After the civil rights, now we have to understand is that the war on poverty would have worked had there would have been a sustained commitment by the government. Lyndon Johnson, through all of his best efforts, he was distracted by the Vietnam War.
True. That's true.
And the Vietnam War,
and
and the Vietnam War was dogging his ass, and this and that and the other, and so he had that. But also, we got to remember that these Dixiecrats were still around.
True.
You know, and these Dixiecrats, even though they seen the change coming, and when I mean change, they seen that, you know, things couldn't go back to pre-Jim Crow,
right?
And they seen that, you know, they have to be a little there was some change coming, but these people were still in government, and so it wasn't that the war on poverty didn't work. It was that it wasn't allowed to go not only long enough, just like with most government interventions or programs when it comes to social needs, it's underfunded.
Right.
So yeah, you got food stamps, and you got I think some educational reforms and stuff. But the civil rights legislation, which the number one mistake of the civil rights legislation is that it didn't address its targeted audience. In order, just like in any other government bill, in order for it to be passed, and I can't blame Lyndon Johnson too much for this, but in order for it to be passed, in order for senators to vote on this, well, we'll vote for that if you include this, or we'll vote for that if you include this. And so what happened was the civil rights bill got so watered down. You know what I mean? Yeah, there was affirmative action, which we seen that we didn't exactly benefit totally from that. But what happened is that the civil rights bill, for all of its intent to correct some wrongs, it was too diluted, it was underfunded, and then what happened was Nixon came in and, like you said, started to roll back a lot of those things that was happening.
Right, and it was under enforced too, and people need to understand that the Civil Rights Act wasn't all of them, because there were more than one. The Civil Rights Acts were not like these universally celebrated. People weren't happy that the Civil Rights Acts were passed.
Right.
The reason, like you said, the only reason they were passed was because language had to be included in this legislation where it wasn't just focused on helping black people. Legislators who wanted this bill passed really did have to change the legislation to say that there would be no discrimination based on sex or a religious affiliation or anything. Anything that was geared towards specifically addressing historic systemic racism against black people specifically, they weren't having that. So even when the Civil Rights Acts were passed, they were being challenged, and people were working legislatively to dismantle them from day one. So, like when recently, a few years ago, that University of Texas lawsuit against that the white college student brought against the University of Texas for reverse discrimination. As a challenge to the Civil Rights Act, that wasn't a surprise, because people have been fighting the Civil Rights Act since they've been passed. The dismantling of a key section of the Voting Rights Act, if y'all have been paying attention, people have been fighting the Voting Rights Act since it was passed. Nobody was in Washington, other than black people, honestly. These people weren't sitting there going, yay, everything is equal. These pieces of legislation were passed, and people who were in power were immediately working on how to weaken them. And they've done it over time, and they have been successful partially because we haven't had anybody fighting with us against them. All right, so that's a part of why we keep talking about these issues.
And it's the last time that the Democratic Party or government period have done anything to specifically address the social problems that black people were going through. We have not had major legislation to address the systemic problems of black people since the Civil Rights Act. And that's like 50 years ago.
That's a great point.
And we have not had, and black people have been voting Democratic Party since then, and the government has not addressed specifically the systemic problems of black people since the Civil Rights. That's 50 years. And yet, black people have been voting Democratic all that time.
Dang.
Yep.
And I didn't even, do you see why all that sexy sitting over there? Sexy.
So you talking about wasted votes? What other group in this country do you know would have been voting for a party for 50 years and not have received anything for the last 50 years and not received the attention of government to address not either one issue?
Nobody. A lot was made about the double digit. We were watching that on CNN earlier today. Yep. A lot was made about the double digit support that Donald Trump got from Hispanics,
right? From
Hispanic voters. Why in the world? If Hispanic voters are looking at the Democratic Party and they're like, y'all ain't doing enough for us. We're not. If 10 to 12% of Hispanic voters jumped ship from the Democratic Party to vote for Trump. Why are black people, and I'm not saying that we should have voted for Trump. I needed to slow that down because I know somebody is going to be like, well, are you really saying that we should vote for Trump? No. What I am saying is that we are loyal to a party that has proven over the last 50 years not to be loyal to us at all. They've proven it just with this one issue. We don't even have to really talk about anything else other than what the Democrats have done in regard to black people since the Kerner Commission Report.
And I disagree, April, Gerald. Man, I don't think that we could just lay that on Stockholm Syndrome. I think that what it is, again, like I said earlier, it's not so much a Stockholm Syndrome, because Stockholm Syndrome kinds of gives the illusion, gives the case that people don't know what they're doing. All right, if I got Stockholm Syndrome, then I'm unconsciously doing something that I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm being influenced some kind of way, and and I'm not responsible for. It's not that black people know that, okay, these guys hate me. These guys hate me a little less. Right. I think what it is the fact that we just don't know how the game is played. There's been a big manipulation in this country, especially when it comes to black people. Black people are the only ones in this country who have to have a leader. And so politicians didn't address us directly. They went through the leaders. And these leaders have agendas. And so what happens is these leaders, they come to us and say, okay, we check these people out and we think they're good. And the manipulation comes from the fact that a lot of our political orientation came through the church.
Yes.
You're looking at a population that came out of slavery. And so who was the leaders? Who was the ones that were able to try to make sense of this world that we're entering in as so-called free people? But a lot of our orientation came through the church. And the ministers and all of them had a lot of power, and people looked to them for answers. Right. So the politicians didn't come to us. They didn't come to black people and say, "Well, this is what I plan." They went to these leaders who oftentimes didn't know how the game was played themselves. Right. And then they come back and say, "Well, we're going to throw our support behind such and such and behind such and such." And I give you a prime example of what I'm talking about. When Trump ran for office, right? They made this big hoopla of all of these black ministers that went to go see him.
True, they did.
Right?
Yes, they did.
Now all of these ministers came from far and wide. You know what I mean? And they came far and wide, pulled up in their cars and all this stuff in front of Trump Tower.
Yep.
They all came. And Trump was trying to make appeal to black people, but what did he do? He did what white politicians traditionally do. They go through the pastors. He didn't go to anybody. He called the pastors. That's true. If I want to address black people, I got to go through the pastors. So he did what most white politicians do.
He did what Hillary Clinton did.
He did what Hillary Clinton did. And so what happens is the pastors came, Dr. this and Dr. so-and-so that, Reverend Dr. that.
Reverend Dr. so-and-so.
And so they all came. And so Jackie and I, we're sitting there watching this. We want to know what's going to come out of this. So, we said, well, these look like intelligent men. What's going to come out of this? Omarosa was there.
Yes, she was.
Omarosa was there. With her tightest dress on.
She's a minister too.
Well, yeah, she's a minister too. So Omarosa was there, and she was the face to let the black ministers know, like, hey y'all, I'm up in here. So you good. Yeah, you good, cause I'm up in here, and I'm gonna make sure I got y'all back. This is the unspoken body language that we have with each other a lot of time. So the ministers came in there. And I told Jackie when I saw this, I said, these jokers are going to come out of here with nothing to say. They didn't go in there to represent us. They didn't even talk about us. And Trump, being the New Yorker that he is, being the carnival barker that he is, yep. I said, I know what he did.
What did he do?
I told Jackie, I said, I'm going to tell you what Trump did. Trump went and sat these ministers down, and after telling him how much respect he has for the black church and how much respect he had for this and how his great-great-grandmother was suckled on the breast of a black church woman and all this other kind of stuff. And once he got that guard down, he did the coup de grace. What he did was he went to that Trump. And I'm not lying about this because one of the pastors said he did this. He went to the Trump and he went down and he got the old Trump family Bible. And he got that old family Bible. Yep, he dusted it off. He had that long face. He maybe had a tear or two. And he said, people got me wrong, but but this is what kept me going all this time. And he went here and he handed over that Bible, and the ministers got to looking through it all. And then at the same time, he looked at Omarosa and said, pass the good cheese. And when they passed the good cheese around and all the drinks and stuff, he had them. When they came out, Roland Martin had one of these pastors on his show.
Oh, that was
and
hilarious.
Roland Martin asked him, he said, Roland Martin asked him, I know cuz you wouldn't have went for that. But Roland Martin had one of these pastors on his show and said, what did you and Donald Trump and y'all talk about? He said, well, we talked about some things. We talked about some things. He said, but Roland Martin said, but what specifically did you talk about? We talked about some specific things. Real specific things. He said, can you tell me what agenda that you brought in from your congregation or from your district, and what was Trump supposed to do? Well, see now you going too deep now, because but we talked about some things, and this, man, I was so disgusted, but I knew that this was what it was going to be, because see, we don't understand how the game is played when it comes to politics. But people understand us. And people know how to play us.
Oh my God.
And that's the problem.
Right there. We talk all the time. We might have to cut this short tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
What I do?
We talk all the time about how important political education is. And I know, we call them, so I read something somewhere where somebody said, don't call people hoteps because that's an insult. I don't know. I don't know. It's just something I've always called these black conscious people who are always talking a good game, but they never actually do anything. One of the things that black people who are conscious can do in the spirit of Kwame Ture is to make the unconscious aware of their unconscious behavior. And how do you do that? Through political education.
Right.
We can't expect people to know that they're being played. That's not just like something you wake up. It really is not something that if you're just watching as a regular working American going about your business, trying to feed your family, trying to keep your head above water, trying to, enjoy a vacation once a year if you can afford that.
Right.
You're not automatically going to come to the realization, hey, wait a minute, I'm being played by, no, you need some help with that. And that's everybody. That is across the board, everybody. But especially for black people who have survived in this country in the specific environments that you talked about.
Right.
Our orientation coming from the white supremacist system, our orientation and our understanding of politics and society and even more morality comes from the church. And even though there has been a strong black liberation theology tradition in this country since we've had a need to fight to be free, meaning since the beginning.
Yeah.
Since we've been here. Please don't think that every black pastor was the plantation's pastor. That's not. We're in a class in our church right now.
Right.
Where we are learning about the long history of black liberation theology. It didn't start in the 60s. Black liberation theology started when we were brought here and when we were made to be enslaved. Mm-hmm. People were using our Christian faith to fight against the misinterpretation of the Bible and using it as a whole nother thing. But you don't realize when you've grown up and matured and done everything in that those traditions, that those traditions are being used to manipulate and play you. This is where we need to educate our people politically. And it's not something we can expect any party. We can't expect either party to do this, because it's both parties that are manipulating us through. This is why people are so, and then we're going to get to the rest of this Kerner Commission report. But I got to say this. I really have to say this. I'm annoyed by people being all pissed off and distracted by this whole Louis Farrakhan and his ridiculous remarks things. You know why y'all are so mad about what Louis Farrakhan said? Because y'all think we actually listen to him. Because exactly what you said. Mm-hmm. Black people are perceived to always need leaders.
Right.
So politicians believe that they go to these particular leaders who speak for black people. And for some reason, y'all think Louis Farrakhan speaks for black people. I don't know too many black people who pay too much attention to Louis Farrakhan.
Well, I mean, not outside the Nation of Islam.
Not outside the Nation of Islam. And do you know how small the Nation of Islam really is? It doesn't have anywhere near the influence that it used to have.
No.
And we're talking about the influence of the Nation of Islam under Malcolm X, who was way more politically astute than Louis Farrakhan. So I mean,
which is why they drove him out, because see, Malcolm X, or El Hajj Malik Shabazz, they were afraid that he might make them actually do something. So they didn't really want to do nothing.
Exactly.
So I mean, so they was like, nah, man, he might make us actually try. He might make us actually want to do something. He might actually make us do something.
Exactly.
So he got to go. You know, we cool just sitting back collecting money and looking tough.
and Malcolm was the one who was advocating, no, you know, we need to do things. So for your average black voter, but especially for your black progressive or left-leaning, even Democratic but left-leaning voter, we're not paying attention to Louis Farrakhan. We ain't paying no attention to Louis Farrakhan. We're not. Well, you are.
Right. Well, black people are not monolithic, and so you know that's the way. And as far as this whole thing of voting Democrat go, this is the reason why when we get back on to the Kerner Commission, this is one of the reasons why you've seen such low voter turnout amongst black people when Hillary ran. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not that Hillary. I mean, she ran a crappy campaign. But it really wasn't about Hillary. And that's the thing. People try to make it about her. Oh, what she said about, you know, predators and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Of course, black people didn't forget all of that. You know, but the thing of it is, black people felt disrespected. And I'm going to tell you why blacks in Milwaukee stayed home, why blacks down south mostly stayed home, why the black turnout rate didn't come out for Hillary like it could have. And that's because the black community felt disrespected. Mm-hmm. When we start talking about, well, you know, why y'all put up a candidate that disrespected us so much? Right. Why did you pick a candidate that that have the track record that she have when it comes to the black community? And you know what y'all said? Well, at least she ain't Trump. You know, so what I'm saying is that it was like, okay, I hear y'all, but you know, and this just didn't come from white people. This came from black celebrities, the Steve Harveys and all them. Mm-hmm. Their thing wasn't to address the concerns and issues of the black masses whose votes they needed. Right. Their thing was, and even Barack Obama, who showed disrespect for the black community when he waited till 0 hour, you know, because he got it like that, that he was going to get on the radio and say, hey, this is Barack Obama, and if you really want the change that I have to keep going on, then you'll go out and vote for Hillary Clinton because we need to keep my legacy alive. Oh, the legacy that's getting me poor. Oh, the legacy where you can't talk about race. Oh, the legacy where, you know, you got to stand up there, man, and hang your head low and scratch your head every time something about race come up. Oh, you talking about the same legacy where you know, you was really scared to even release all of them young brothers and sisters in prison for drug charges and stuff, non-violent drug charges, where you could have basically, man, did like Lincoln did when he let all of them Confederate soldiers out of incarceration.
Ooh, this tea
now
right
here you got Confederate soldiers that Lincoln just gave a mass pardon to.
Yes, he did.
You know what I mean? Now, you couldn't be Lincoln. You were so scared that some of these white politicians was going to use, you know, that you was afraid that they was going to use that kind of action about you doing something for black people against you, and not so much against you. You was all about the party. So what happened is that it wasn't about looking out for the folks who gave you 9% of the vote and who who brought issues to you, saying that, look, we got a greater percentage of our young people locked up behind bullshit ass drug charges than anybody else, non-violent drug charges. We ain't telling you to let you know, we're not telling you to let Willie what's his name, Willie Horton out. Now, you know, he's dead now.
He's dead now.
But we saying that we, you know, black folks wasn't saying, you know, let out the dude that killed the 3 people up the street.
Right.
They saying that when it was known that the government was using these disparities on drugs that significantly impacted the lives of young black people. And they went to Barack Obama and said, look, man, you can make this right. We got kids that have been in prison for 20 years because they sold a little bit of weed or they did this. And you were so afraid, you know, that they would use this against your beloved party, because imagine now, government hasn't done anything for black people legislatively in 50 years.
50 years.
So here it is, the first black president, and you wasn't about to break that trend. So your thing was, if I do this, they're going to use this against me, because it's okay to let our white kids out of jail. You know, it's okay to go down there, but anytime we have to remember the politics that in this country, you cannot get elected in this country if you're perceived to want to do anything for black people. Barack Obama was the same way when he ran for office. That's the reason why when he addressed our community, it was pull your pants up, be a better father, you know, take a bath, you know what I mean, get a haircut. Yo, put a belt around your face. You know what I mean? But, you know, black women get married. You know, all this stuff. But then when he went out to the white folks, he talked about policy. And what he was going to do.
Jobs, taxes.
That's right. So again, if you come on the show and you say to me, you know, why are you so hard on Obama? That's why I'm hard on Obama. Because the night that man was elected, I cried. Because I never thought that I would see a person of color in the White House. And not so much him. You know, the jury was kind of out on him. Kenyan father, white mother. But damn it to hell, I knew Michelle was real deal. I mean, so I knew Michelle was the real deal.
Michelle was an old girl from Chicago.
So I'm saying to myself, like, okay, you know, white folks was trying to take Barack from us because they was like, well, he ain't really black. Got a white mom.
White.
And you know, and he's not one of those Negroes. He's actually African. So, you know, y'all, I don't know if y'all can really claim him. But then you couldn't mess with Michelle. So I was like, well, at least we got a black first lady in the White House. And so my aspirations was up there with everybody else, that this man would, I knew that he couldn't fix. America got a lot of shit with it. So I knew that he wasn't going to be able to turn the ship completely around.
One person wasn't going to do it in 12 years.
In 12 years. So, you know, I could forgive him for that. But my thing is that, yo, bruh, we done got you up in there twice. And here it is, I'm reading a story in March of 2018 of black folks in Arizona who's having a hard time of putting food on the table, Negro, and you just left. And
didn't try.
Right.
Seriously, that's my beef. That's my beef with Barack Obama, was that he didn't try. These issues aren't new. And let me share this with you, so we can finish talking about this thing. This is from Danny D. Glover's page.
Not the Danny Glover.
Not the.
Not that I can't catch a cab, Danny Glover, and I burnt the whole thing down. Not that Danny Glover.
Danny D. Glover. But so look at the mass incarceration, the black incarceration. In 1968, the year the Kerner Commission came out, 604 black people incarcerated per 100,000 black people. In 2018, how do you get that many Negroes in prison?
Oh my God.
How? You mean to tell me all of a sudden in 50 years we just grew more criminal than everybody else? Bull. That's some crap. No, we didn't. You know how it happened? Let me tell you how it happened. Where is it? Where'd it go? Richard Nixon's advisor actually told us how it happened. People didn't believe this story was true. When it came out, it's amazing how people don't believe stuff that just blows up their little narrative, right? Because black people have been saying that the war on drugs has been racist since the war on drugs was implemented.
That there was a social agenda to it.
It was another form of social control, and we told people, and people were like, "No, y'all just a bunch of drug using criminals."
You need more daddies in the home.
You need more daddies in the home. Where your daddies at?
Yep.
Well, half our daddies got killed in Vietnam. So, but anyway, so here from and you can find this story anywhere, but we pulled this from the International Business Times. This is how you get over 1,700 black people incarcerated per 100,000 in 50 years. Is the war on drugs racist? Nixon aide admitted policies were designed to target black people and anti-war protesters. This came from, sorry about that. Let me go. This came from an interview that was done with Nixon's former aide. And there were tapes that this guy who wrote this book made when he was doing this. He was writing the book. He was doing this interview.
It was John Ehrlichman, I think.
Yes, John Ehrlichman said that, let's see. He said on this tape, he bluntly responded that the so-called war on drugs was started to disrupt and imprison anti-war protesters and black people.
I mean, and see, this is what's so criminal. Anti-war protesters, right? I'm not saying that it was justified, but you can say, well, okay, they're my enemies because they're protesting what I'm for.
Right.
I'm the president. I'm for getting rid of communism in Vietnam.
Right.
They're against it. They're my enemies. But you just said black people, whether we was for you or not.
What black people do? Black people ain't do nothing.
Whether we was for it or not.
Exactly. It's like that's messed up, but that's a great point. It's like, wait a minute. Okay, I understand you wanting to stop the anti-war protest, but what's black people got to do?
Right.
So, okay.
I mean, you got black people fighting for you over there.
Exactly. Okay, so here we go. I'm sorry, that's just funny. You want to know what this was really about? Ehrlichman asked Dan Baum, who was writing a book about politics and drug prohibition, according to an essay written by Baum in the current Harper's Magazine. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. Now, listen here. The Nixon White House now it's obvious why the Nixon White House had a problem with the anti-war left,
right?
Because the Nixon White House, like you said, wanted to blow up Vietnam,
right.
And the anti-war left was turning the sentiment of the country against the Nixon administration, because before that we've been very supportive of our government in going to war, when we finally decided to. Vietnam was different. So the Nixon administration wasn't having it, so they're like, let's lock these long-haired hippies up.
Right, that's right.
That's what they did. But black people were considered the enemy of the Nixon administration because of the Kerner Commission Report.
Exactly. There you go. See, that's the connection, folks.
There's the connection.
There's the connection, people.
Black people were considered the enemy of the Nixon administration because the previous administration proved that the government hated black people and treated black people like garbage and needed to fix what it was breaking.
And that cost money. So black people were costing Richard Nixon money, so black people were the Especially
enemy.
now, mind you,
Come on, y'all.
he was black people was going to cost the government money during a time when the government needed money for war
To blow people up in Vietnam.
And also, we got to remember, MMT people, is the fact that this was before Nixon put the dollar on the took it off the gold standard. So the money was so it wasn't like now where the government can print all this money out and just say, okay, I owe you, and you know, no, the money was backed by gold, so the money was tied to something that could affect it,
right?
Right. So here you're talking about millions of black people who we might got to spend money on because the Kerner Commission said that we got to fix this stuff, and this war over there is costing me money. So something got to go.
Something got to go. I think it's gonna be the black people.
Right.
So, excuse me. He went on to say, we knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the Vietnam War or to be black. Although, we have tried to make it illegal to be black in this country before. But, excuse me. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Ehrlichman continued, according to Baum. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. And yes, we are going to provide you a link to that article too. So when black people talk about mass incarceration and mass incarceration being an intentional plan to get rid of black people, really, in this country. We're not making this up. Not only are we talking about the convict lease system after slavery ended officially, not only are we talking about tenant farming, sharecropping, which we understand white people were sharecroppers too, and they were treated like crap by the landowners too. We understand that, but we're also talking about situations where we posted a story on our page a couple days ago where people in one town, black people in one town, didn't even know that they weren't slaves anymore.
Yeah, this was down in Louisiana.
Yeah, until like the 60s.
Yeah, and how they did it was. And, because, really, this is a sad story because I found out and doing my research that this was not an isolated case.
Right.
That this actually happened in other places too. But what happened is that some of these communities were so remote. And you can still find these communities today in America, maybe not, as many, but we're talking about in the 60s. And a lot of these communities were remote. And they were self-sustained communities.
Right.
So you didn't have to go out of town for anything.
That's right.
And so these black folks were working on this plantation. And how the people who owned the land were able to trick them into slavery is doing what they did the old sharecropper way by saying, well, if you want to leave, then you have to pay what you owe. The thing of it is you never paid.
Right.
And so the next generation was born and they were told, well, you have to pay the debt that your mother left or your father left. Then they would be told that, oh, well, that's not enough. And so a couple of generations after the so-called Emancipation Act happened, this was allowed to continue. It was up until the 1960s that this stuff was found out. And these folks who were on these de facto slave plantations were allowed to actually be freed, but they did not know that they did not know that they were free because this stuff happened during slavery, and then they had a few generations. And this is the thing that I like to say to folks who always want to talk about how long ago slavery was. You got to remember that it was only a few generations ago. So if you're somebody who was on this plantation in the 1960s, 9 times out of 10, your grandmother was a slave. Your grandfather was a slave.
Right.
That's just going back less than 100 years ago.
Exactly.
So we're not talking about a long time, and it's not inconceivable to see that if the game was played the way the game was played, that you could keep people ignorant of what's going on in the outside world. From understanding what from what their situation is.
Right.
So it's not inconceivable to see that you can imprison someone on large tracts of land in an isolated community for a couple of generations, and they not even know that, you know, that they don't have to be in that situation.
Especially when you're in a small town.
Right.
And more than likely, the same couple of white families own most of the businesses, are on the police department, are judges, are teachers.
They're all down with it.
They're all down. We're looking at a case that we had our friend Bob Schlehuber looking at it. We're looking at a case right now in this county in Baker County, Florida, where a young black man was killed on the property of one of the families. One of the 2 or 3 families that pretty much owns everything in the town. They just painted a mural of the Ku Klux Klan on a public building less than 10 years ago.
Right.
So police. I mean, these are people who the families are. They've been on the sheriff's department. Mm-hmm. They are judges. They own most of the large employers. Most of the people in the community work for these people, so they're afraid of them. So it is not inconceivable when powerful people control all of the systems. Of course, it's you know, someone can be isolated from the rest of society and to be taken advantage of. It happens in human trafficking, doesn't it? I don't understand how you know what? I don't understand how y'all can understand human trafficking, but you can't understand how black people are terrified of all the white people who run the entire town. I don't get that. Okay, but anyway, let's get...
Well, no, and just to add that there's this one story that we told you guys about last show of this Netflix documentary called Boy 23.
Right.
Actually, it's Amazon. Mm-hmm. And this was a case of a rich, powerful family in Brazil who had Nazi sympathies, who took these orphan black boys out of an orphanage with the promise of giving them a good education, only to enslave them. And these boys grew up in slavery in modern day Brazil.
Yep.
So you know, these things, man, I mean, when folks want to do evil to you, they can.
Yeah. And when they're powerful people, they all work together with the system that they all control to keep it a secret and to keep those people from getting help from other people. We've been telling you this is how it works. And this is why
we're here, to inform you.
Yes.
And so we can do something. See, it's not just, you know, and I'm going to let you get back, Jack. It's not so much that, you know, we sit up here and, you know, we just want to just spew all this stuff on it. We're saying this stuff because with information comes power. Mm-hmm. And we're hoping that with this information, this causes us to act.
Yes.
And causes us to not put the grievances of anyone on the back burner, and especially not black people, on the back burner that has been done so frequently. Exactly.
I mean, because when we're looking at mass incarceration, we need to make clear, I don't know any other way to do it other than to show you a bunch of data, because, you know, you can argue with us all day long, but you can't argue with data. So here, white people are more likely to deal drugs, but black people are more likely to get arrested for it.
Right. Oh, wow.
Now, you have to understand that the mass incarceration phenomenon was specifically designed through the war on drugs. John Ehrlichman just told you that.
Yeah, because he was dying and he wanted to get into heaven.
And let me tell you something. If I die and I go to heaven and I see John Ehrlichman up there, I'm going to have some words with Jesus. I'm going to have to ask him, what kind of joint are you running? But, so we know the connection between the Kerner Commission, the war on drugs now, racism, and mass incarceration. Please understand how this has played out. Mm-hmm. As far as arrests of black people. This is from, what is this? The Washington Post. And this says, this chart shows the change in the number of arrests of black Americans in the United States between 2011 and 1980 by category of crime. Now, I have to admit, when I looked at this chart, like the first 2 times, I was kind of confused by it because the title is backward. It could be, you know, it could be much more clear, but this is what it shows. between 1980 and 2011, there has been a negative 2,631% drop in arrests of black people for violent crimes, or the number of arrests. This is how many less black people have been arrested for violent crime. Because, you know, we're supposed to all be violent criminals that everyone is afraid to live around, because we all live in shootout zones, and we all just run around shooting and killing each other because we have no fathers in our home.
Right.
Okay?
While at the same time, we're able to cook chicken and eat watermelon and all this stuff.
And dance really well.
Right.
Property crimes, negative 70,231. This is the change in the number of arrests. So we ain't breaking into your house like that. We ain't breaking into your car. We ain't stealing your stuff like that. Not between 1980 and 2011.
Right.
And I'll guarantee you it hasn't changed all that much in 7 years. Look at the positive change, the increase in the number of arrests of black people for drug violations between 1980 and 2011. 346,000 more drug abuse violations. 620,000 more arrests for possession. These are non-violent crimes.
Right, right.
What does this translate to? Whites were about 45% more likely than blacks to sell drugs in 1980, according to an analysis of the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth by economist Robert Fairley. This was consistent with a 1989 survey of youth in Boston. My own analysis data from the 2012 National Survey on Drug Use and Health shows that 6.6% of white adolescents and young adults aged 12 to 25 sold drugs, compared to just 5% of blacks. A 32% difference. Our kids ain't a bunch of drug dealers either. This partially reflects racial differences in the drug markets in black and white communities. This is critically important, because you're talking about a crime bill that was implemented by Bill Clinton that put more police in black neighborhoods. That, yes, we needed help with violent crime, but when the murderers got locked up, the cops stuck around and were arresting the nonviolent criminals.
Right, right.
And this is so all the cops were in the black neighborhoods, and nobody was watching Sally and Bob's kids in the suburbs doing heroin in their kids' bedroom.
You remember there was a story out locally where a former DEA agent related a story of how black neighborhoods were targeted, and he said to one of the his partners, he said, "Man," he said, "I know a whole bunch of white kids up there in Silver Springs and stuff that's doing drugs. Why we don't never go up there?" And his partner said, "Because we would have hell to pay if we was to knock over one of their doors."
Right. He
said, nobody cares what we do down here.
Exactly. We're gonna find that video and share it with you too. But this is the difference. This is critical to understanding how this happened. In poor black neighborhoods, drugs tend to be sold outdoors in the open. Why? Because we're a bunch of degenerates? No, because most poor black people live in apartment buildings. We live in apartments. So, and why do we mostly live in apartments in urban areas? Because we were locked out of the housing market in the suburbs.
Yep, that's right.
Whew. In white neighborhoods, by contrast, drug transactions typically happened indoors, often between friends and acquaintances. If you sell drugs outside, you're much more likely to get caught. Let's see. Is there anything else? No, there's nothing else in that article that
and I didn't see this in the article, but I also wanted to say that my wife made me sit up. So but I also wanted to say that I didn't see this reflected in the article, but one thing I could say is that one of the reasons why more black people were locked up during the with the outdoor drug sales and stuff is not only just the apartments, but the high unemployment rate.
That too.
You know, the high unemployment rate amongst black youths, which basically a lot of them turn to drugs in order to have an income.
See, you can't.
So more people on the street, more people getting locked up.
More people getting locked up, and people don't have jobs. They can't feed themselves. They can't pay rent. What's the only industry in some of these neighborhoods? Drugs, crime. So if you don't look at these issues and how they connect, how racist housing policy created the ghetto, because it did, how the war on drugs was an intentional 180 turn away from the policies of the war on poverty that came out of the Kerner Commission, and how the war on drugs was an intentional criminalization and targeting of black people in this country, and how mass incarceration came out of the war on drugs. And that's why we have 2 million black people in prison today, and we're just 13% of the population. It's not because we're a bunch of criminals. It's because the system really does and really has targeted black people.
And the results of that is the fact that this just shows that we have weak politics. This shows that the only way that a people can be attacked like this is the fact that people have to be defenseless, and they have to defenseless, number one, and number two is the fact that they don't have anyone in politics looking out for them.
And this is why that is always the point that we have when we talk to progressives about any policy any progressive person ever puts forward. We were on Loud and Clear last Friday. If you didn't know, just as a quick aside, because we forgot to tell you at the top of the show, we're on Loud and Clear, the Loud and Clear podcast every Friday now. We have a segment on Loud and Clear every Friday, and we talk about, you know, midterm election stuff, but you know we bring the connection with these issues into that discussion, because there's no way we cannot. And let me tell you why that it's important that we do that, because the guy we talked about this past Friday, Beto O'Rourke down in Texas, I was hoping that this guy was not like another one of those Democrats who is just, you know, the typical third way neoliberal Democrat with the vanilla Democratic policy platform. You know, I'm pro-choice. You know, I want gun control. $15 an hour. You know, this typical stuff. So I looked at this guy, Beto O'Rourke, his platform, and this dude he doesn't shy away from anything. He's got racial justice. He's got equality on his platform. These are the kinds of politicians we need in the progressive circles. You know, politicians who are not afraid to say there is a problem with the system still in regard to how black people are treated, and this is what I plan to do to address that. And yes, there's still problems with the way women are treated, and these are my policies for dealing with that, and immigrants. But don't tell me as a black person that I need to sign on to everybody else's struggle, but nobody pays any attention to anything that we've got going on over here, when the entire system is stacked against us, and they haven't even been keeping it a secret. They ain't even been lying about it. So another one of the ways that you can see the way mass incarceration is played out, and we cannot share a link with this with you because we don't own the rights to it, but we encourage you to go to, I think it may not be on Netflix anymore, but if it is, go watch the documentary 13th. You need to watch that. And then go buy Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. And then go buy, I forget the author's name, but the book is called Slavery by Another Name. And yes, we're going to give you a link to those so you can find it. You need to understand why addressing these issues, specifically in the context of black people, is important. Talking about mass incarceration in the context of black people, and I've heard some black people say this, is not admitting that we're a bunch of criminals. No, talking about mass incarceration in the context of black people is exposing what the system has done to black people using mass incarceration.
So, I mean, that's the same fact of a bunch of slave people who are enslaved getting off of slave ships, and does that, you know, say that they're a bunch of criminals too? You know what I mean? They were captured. You know, the people were captured. It was a very well orchestrated system that was not only backed up by the individual nation states, but it was backed up by the Papal Bull thing. So it even had the stamp of approval of the church.
It did.
So I mean, so are we going to look at this well orchestrated method of enslaving and dehumanizing people, and then when the people get off the ships and chains, somehow blame them?
Isn't that what's been done?
Well, that's my point. So my point is that the fact that here you got people that's locked up and because they're sucked in by, again, a well orchestrated machine to enslave and dehumanize people. But then again, I mean, when you read that report about Richard Nixon, one of the things that they said in that report was that we were going to use the evening news. So when you start talking about using the evening news, that's what, you know, we always look at Goebbels, the propaganda minister from Nazi Germany. You know, look, rocket technology ain't the only things we learned from the Nazis. You know what I mean? They ain't the only thing we learned from the Nazis, man. We learned a lot. You know, this country learned a lot of things from the Nazi era of Germany. And one of the things was propaganda, you know. So, you know, I think that kind of got glossed when you read that, because it was like, it wasn't only just, you know, targeting black people and anti-war demonstrators through the drugs and stuff, but the method was clear. We're going to use the news, and so the news is to demonize these people, because you can't turn attitudes towards or for people without propaganda.
That's right.
You know, so what happens was, we know that we came up during a time, man, where every time you saw black people in the news, it always had to do something with crime. You know, so it's, you know, so I just thought that was an important distinction to make, that they even said that we would vilify them night after night on the evening news. And I mean, come on, man. I mean, if you're of a certain age, man, you definitely remember that.
Yeah. And even today, I had to put it up again because I'm glad you made that point. Thank you for making that point, because you're absolutely right. We see that being done today. Still, it was done with throughout all the presidential campaigns. When we bring up the Willie Horton campaign, the Willie Horton commercial, that sunk, who was it? Michael Dukakis's campaign.
Because George Bush the first used it against him.
Propaganda, anti-black propaganda. I mean, I'm sure there were white murderers in jail, but these people understand that nobody scares white voters like black criminals. Nothing scares white voters more than black criminals. Nothing. Why? Because of what Ehrlichman and Nixon did in vilifying black people on the evening news every night. This is how most white people in this country still think the Black Panther Party was a terrorist organization, because that's how they were portrayed in the evening news. This is why so many white people think that Black Lives Matter, are anti-cop and hate white people, because that's how they're portrayed on the evening news. This is why people think that black people who are in jail or in prison are all criminals and deserve to be in prison, because that's how they're portrayed on the evening news. But you're not getting the information about why our jails and prisons are full of black and poor people that we are giving you, not if you watch the evening news, but that's why we're here. So this is an article from Common Dreams, and we could stay here all night long, but we're not going to do it. I think we might end on this one. There are 40 reasons our jails and prisons are full of black and poor people. Now, of course, I'm not going to read all 40 reasons to you, but it is important to look at some of these numbers. Like I said, you can argue with us all day long and say that we're wrong and you don't agree with us, and we're divisive and we're all okay, fine. You can't argue with data. If you do, then you're just arguing with data. You don't like facts, and I can't help you with that. The U.S. Department of Justice reports 2.2 million people are in our nation's jails and prisons, and another 4.5 million people are on probation or parole in the U.S., totaling 6.8 million people, 1 of every 35 adults. We are the most incarcerated, we have the most incarcerated population in the world. We incarcerate more people in this country than China. We are far and away the world leader in putting our own people in jail. Most of the people inside are poor and black. Here are 40 reasons why. Number 1, it is not just about crime. Our jails and prisons have grown from holding about 500,000 people in 1980 to 2.2 million today. The fact is that crime rates have risen and fallen independently of growing incarceration rates. So it doesn't matter how many people we put in jail. Crime rates go up or down regardless of what law enforcement does.
Right. We can't. You can't just lock your way, incarcerate your way out of any crime. Wave. Or whatever.
Exactly. And why is that? Because on this show, we have made it clear on many different occasions that crime is a result of societal issues. Crime is not a result of just people being evil. I mean, there are evil people, but we're talking about widespread crime. We're talking about societal issues that create an environment where crime flourishes. All right. Number 2, police discriminate. I know people love to continue to argue this one, but the data bears this out. The first step in putting people in jail starts with interactions between police and people. From the very beginning, black and poor people are targeted by the police. How do we know that's true? John Ehrlichman said they were going to do it.
Yeah, he said it. Yeah, from the highest levels.
All right, now we go down and we'll look at, the federal civil rights challenge to stop and frisk in New York City, where the police stopped over 500,000 people a year without any indication that the people they stopped had been involved in any crime at all. 80% of those stops were of black and Latinos, who comprise just 25 and 28% of New York City's total population.
Now, let me tell you what stop and frisk was really.
What
it was just
really?
Another manifestation of show me your papers.
That's exactly what it was. Exactly. And I guess I'll have to find a link for that too, so y'all can do some homework on that, because that came out of slavery too. We talked about that last week, actually.
Yep.
We talked about it last week. And most of the people stopped in stop and frisk, most of the black people and Latinos stopped in stop and frisk, were never caught with any contraband.
Of course
I mean,
not.
Like 80% of those people.
It's lazy policing.
But most of the white people who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, who were stopped doing stop and frisk, most of the white people were found with contraband. But yeah, black people are the criminals though. Okay. Police traffic stops also racially target people in cars. We talked about that a couple shows ago, and we used Baltimore as an example. The case of the Baltimore Gun Trace Task Force profiling specific kinds of cars.
Yep.
4, once stopped, black and Hispanic motorists are more likely to be given tickets than white drivers stopped for the same offenses. And if you notice, these are all hyperlinks in here. So when we give you a link to this document, please click on all these hyperlinks.
And they're connected to proof.
Yes, look at all this data. So you don't tell people Jackie and Abda said no, you point them to the data. We're just good at telling the story, because this needs to be the discussion. And we're really hoping that you take some things that we say and are able to counter some of the narratives you hear about why these issues are not important. And if you can't quite do that, then share our video. That'll help us out a lot too. Blacks and Latinos more likely to be searched. There's something else down here I was looking for. 8. School to prison pipeline. In schools, African American kids are much more likely to be referred to the police. The police, not detention, not the principal, to the police than other kids. Though black people make up about 12% of the U.S. population, black children are 28% of juvenile arrests. 10, we just talked about that. The war on drugs targets black people. Then there are, oh, this is what I was looking for. This is critical. The bail system penalizes poor people.
You mean the ransom system?
The bail system.
Yeah, it's ransom.
Bail.
That's what they call it, bail's ransom.
Okay, ransom.
Yeah, the state kidnaps you, and then you got to pay ransom to get out.
Understand, and this is what people, I say understand a lot. I just realized that. I think I said understand like 8 times during this whole show because I realized that people don't understand these things and how they're connected. Understand that a lot of people who are in jail have actually not been committed, have actually not been convicted of any crime.
Yeah, I mean, you're innocent until proven guilty. You know, technically.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
But if you can't afford to pay bail, you have to stay in jail.
Yep.
In many states and municipalities in this country, that is what they do with people. This is why jails are overcrowded.
Yeah, there was a story I read today where they said that some states are trying to get rid of the cash bail system.
Yes, and it is desperately needed. Oh, I keep doing that and forgetting that I change the screen when I do that. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, if you're poor, if you are arrested, even if you didn't do anything, you could be the wrong person. You could really be innocent. Mm-hmm. But if you can't pay the bail, then they're not going to let you out until your trial date.
And don't get locked up on a Friday.
You ain't getting out till Monday.
Yep.
So here we're talking about a
and
group.
Depending on the jail you better hope you make friends.
What? Come on now. Now we're talking, why is this important for black people if we're not all a bunch of criminals? Let me tell you why it's important. If you are from a group of people who are more poor than any other group of people in this country, and you are among the group of people who have not made any more money since 2000, have not improved in this wonderful improving economy since 2000, where every other group of people has, including Latinos, you still po. Mm-hmm. Your bail is $500. That doesn't seem like a whole lot of money, right?
No.
If you have a low-wage job, let's say you're working, but you have a low-wage job. Or if you have a halfway decent job, but you don't have any money saved because your housing is 40% of your take-home pay.
Right.
And you can't save money because after you pay your rent and your electric and maybe the cheapest phone bill you can, mobile phone bill you can find, and feed yourself on oodles and noodles, you might have $20 left. Mm. And you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cops scoop you up on some raid. You don't have the money in the bank for $500 bail. You get one phone call.
Yeah, some you don't even get that now.
You might not even get that.
Yeah.
The person you call, what if that person is in the same economic position you're in?
And if you're black, they more likely are.
Thank you. So you got 2 black people who don't have any money. You can't help yourself get out of jail. The person you call can't help you get out of jail. That person calls 5 people who are also in the same position. And those 5 people around them can't scrape up enough money to post a $500 or $1,000 bail. Why was Sandra Bland in jail?
She couldn't post bail.
Thank you.
And let me tell you this too. One of the things that black people suffer along from being poor is that black people really don't have any social capital.
Right.
So we can't call Judge Higgins down at the court and be like, "Hey, Judge, my son's down there. Yeah, he did a stupid thing. I need him to be out tonight." Mm-hmm. Or I don't need him to sit there till Monday. I need him out of there. You know how it is, Judge.
Right.
We don't have those kind of connections. We can't sit up there and say, "Well, let me call the Councilman Roy."
Right.
And have Councilman Roy make sure that, I can get my peoples out and something like that. So black people like social capital too, which is very important.
Yep. So there are, like I said, there are 40 reasons why 20 is it. When poor people face felony charges, they often find the public defenders overworked and underfunded. If you don't have money to post your bail, you and 7 people can't come up with $1,000 or $500 to post your bail. How in the world are these same people will come up with a $10,000 retainer for an attorney?
Well, see, and this also shows you the brokenness of the criminal justice system, because here it is you're supposed to receive a fair trial, but yet the states will always fund the prosecutor's department more than they would fund. The prosecutor has the resources to do all the investigation,
right,
to do this and do that, but the public defender's office normally don't have the resources to match what the prosecutor is able to do. If you was actually living in a place where you're supposed to get a fair trial, then the public defender's office would be just as equally staffed and equally resourced as the prosecutor's office, and that's never the case.
Exactly. Here's another one. We talk about this quite a bit. Lots of poor people plead guilty. The whole plea bargain system. The whole plea bargain. Oh, it's such a scam.
And I'm going to tell you why that's like that.
Why
Most
is
of the
that?
time that's like that because the county jails suck.
What do you mean?
They suck. County jails suck. And what I'm saying is that you have the county jails are in such bad condition that people just want to get out of there.
Oh wow.
So the courts are so backed up is that these public defenders will come to you and they say, you can get out of here if you just plead to this.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And the county jails are so bad, so overcrowded. I mean, just the conditions are so bad that most people, they just want to leave and they don't care how they leave.
Oh my God.
And from what I heard, a lot of people, the rumor is that that the prisons are a lot better than the county jails. So if you could just get to the prisons, you can at least live a little better.
Oh my God.
And that's why a lot of people plead guilty.
And that's aside from number 22, where many people are forced to plead guilty. It says, consider all the exonerations of people who were forced by police to confess, even when they did not do the crime, who were later proven innocent. What case right off the top of my head, the Central Park 5,
right,
that our president was moved to take out a full page ad in the, the New York Post, and say that those kids who were coerced into confessing for a crime they didn't commit needed to be executed. They were animals. And then when they filed suit and won their lawsuit against the city of New York, he took out another ad and said that the lawsuit or the settlement was the biggest theft against New York that had ever happened. Yeah. So
we got 10 minutes.
Yeah,
so
we
I
got
know
10
we
minutes.
We're not going
through all 40, but
no.
Yeah, it's 40 reasons, and they are all connected. Every single one of those reasons are connected to the war on drugs and the war on black people using mass incarceration in this country. We're going to give you a link to that article. We're going to give you a link to the article from the International Business Times, John Ehrlichman, whole bunch of other stuff, everything that we have looked at tonight. The next show we do, we are going to look at, let's see, what is the other thing? Oh, unemployment. The other part of this three-pronged attack on black people that has existed in this country since we've been here, but was really ramped up after the Kerner Commission and after the policies that were implemented from the Kerner Commission were rolled back. Because the entire point behind all of this was never to allow black people to be empowered enough to influence policy.
Right.
That was the whole point. So, thank you all very much for joining us tonight. As always, man, these discussions they're never easy for us to have. I mean, I know it seems like we have a great time talking about, but I think we just enjoy having the discussion.
Well, I mean, yeah,
But,
because the discussion is necessary.
right.
You know, I mean, here we are talking about politics, learning how to play the game. And the first thing in politics, you got to learn what you need. And
Exactly.
you got to learn what your wants are. You got to learn what your needs are. And then you got to go to people who want your vote and say, here it is. This is what's vexing me, as the old folks say. And if you want my vote, man, I need you to address this.
Right.
You know, so I mean, we got to get out of the first black this, the first female this, the first this, first.
Yeah.
None of that has helped us.
No.
It's about what can you do for me, and that's politics. Politics is bloody. It's a blood sport. It's not kumbaya. It's not everybody raising hands and going back and forth and wearing our ribbons and our pussy hats and all that stuff. No, politics is about going in there and telling these folks, either you do this for me or your ass is out of a job.
Exactly. And I just wanted really quick to make sure I got back over here to YouTube. And Rick Scorpio joined us tonight, and he said, this is why we enjoy doing this so much, because see, we have a good time talking to each other all of the time. Honestly, we talk like this all the time about almost everything. We really do. We were supposed to be watching a horror movie tonight to get our minds off of politics, and we ended up watching Flint Town on Netflix.
Yeah.
You got to watch that. That's actually very good. So this is just the kind of people we are. But one of the reasons we enjoy doing this so much is because of the interaction we get with you guys. And Rick Scorpio just said something that it makes
a cool name.
It is
Rick Scorpio.
But you know what? It sounds like an old DJ from like the 90s.
Oh yeah.
So Rick said, and we really appreciate this kind of input. Rick said, I work in a large jail in Metro Atlanta, and everything you stated is true. He has true in all capital letters. I have seen many black men with just $100 bail sit in jail for weeks. The worst part is this jail is run by blacks. Woo!
Neocolonialism.
What do we say about classism? Because a whole bunch of us have that, look, I'm not like those Negroes kind of attitude. Look, man. So yeah, these conversations must continue to happen until the change we are due happens for us. And as progressives, if your progressive heroes, if your progressive politicians can't get on board with pushing for justice for the most marginalized people in this country, then they're not our heroes, and don't ask us to unify with them.
Yeah, I got a question from a very good friend of the show, Carl Jones, I'm sorry. Carl Jones asked, how do you feel about UN reparations? There is a report that's been out for, I think, with the last year or so, where a committee, United Nations Committee of Legal, what they call it, made up of lawyers.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the commission.
Can't remember. Yeah, the commission, but it's made up of international lawyers who determined that, and they looked at the United States' history, and they said, given the evidence, black people in this country are owed reparations by the United States government. Now, the United Nations has no way to enforce that on this government. And I think that we support reparations on this show.
Yes, we do.
And we also suggest that progressives make politicians go on record to say that they support reparations. That was one of my disappointments with Bernie Sanders, is that he wasn't brave enough to say that he supported reparations. Barack Obama, once again, the first black president, said that he didn't think that reparations would ever happen. So I don't need people like that to represent me.
Yeah.
So this is the thing, Carl, to answer your question. I think that the United Nations is correct in stating that publicly. The only problem that I have is that it has no teeth. And so the United Nations can't. But I will say this on a side note with United Nations. United Nations need to start cleaning up its own backyard with the way that United Nations soldiers are raping women, and especially black women around the world in these countries that they serve. United Nations has a horrible record of sexual abuse in the countries that they are serving in, and the United Nations hasn't done enough to deal with that. So that's a side note. But to answer your question, I think that it's a long time coming. This is actually a dream of Haj Malik Shabazz, who took our case to the United Nations.
Yes, he did.
So this is actually, I see a dream of his coming true, that on the international arena, folks are starting to realize that we are due reparations. And it also shuts up the white American racists in this country who constantly keep trying to say that we're not owed nothing. No, the international community says that we are.
Absolutely. And I would just like to add in closing that usually when someone says I'm for reparations, the automatic response is, well, how will we pay them? We've been talking about reparations for decades. Meaning black people. We've been talking about reparations for decades. This is not something that we have not put a lot of thought into. If you really want to know, if you're really interested in finding out how we believe reparations can be implemented, all you do is ask.
That's it.
All you have to do is ask. We'll be glad to tell you. So, and one day we probably will do a show on that. I think we've definitely mentioned it before, but I'll just tell you to look up a man named Charles Ogletree. There you go. So, thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Please share this video. Follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. Luqman Nation, LuqmanNation. You can search for us on all those platforms and find us there. Consider becoming a patron of Luqman Nation with a monthly contribution, because there is stuff that we want to do.
Let the audience know about this conference that we wanted to attend on their behalf down in, was it New Orleans?
Oh, that's right. In April, now I have to go to the page and find the thing.
Just indulge us, y'all, just real quick.
There is a Black Organizing and Political Education Conference that is in St. Louis, Missouri, on the weekend of April 7th, I believe. And please consider supporting us for travel expenses to get to that conference. We will obviously provide live streams where we're allowed to. Please remember, folks, that everybody who has a conference doesn't want their stuff broadcast out to the world at the time. So if we don't live stream something, it's because people don't want to tell their business right then. And they have a right to do that.
Right. And part of this is that we're trying to connect with other people around the country so we can come up with a black agenda in order to present to these politicians. So we're just not talking about this on our live stream. We actually want to implement things so that we can have an agenda and work with other grassroots organizations around the country and come up with something solid so we can have something to present to these politicians who be knocking on our door.
Exactly. So please support us through Patreon with a monthly contribution or a one-time contribution, either through our GoFundMe or through PayPal. You can find all of those outlets by searching under Luqman Nation, LuqmanNation. Join us for Pitbull and Politics on Saturday evenings, most Saturday evenings at 9 p.m. on Spreaker. And soon we will be reviving Brick by Brick in Luqman Nation with an interesting thing, a book study. So stay tuned for that. Is that everything?
That's it.
Thanks again for joining us, you all. We appreciate your support. Have a great evening. As always, be good to each other.
If I didn't care,
no.
enough would you.